You work hard. Every single day you wake up early, go to work, deal with deadlines, answer emails, sit through meetings, and put in the effort because you believe you're building a better future. At the end of the month, your paycheck arrives. You pay your bills, cover your expenses, maybe put a little money into savings, and tell yourself you're being responsible. And honestly, you probably are. But here's the thing. Have you ever looked at your financial life and wondered why it still feels like you're running in place? Maybe you're earning more than you did a few years ago. Maybe your savings account balance is bigger than it's ever been. Maybe you've avoided major financial mistakes. Yet somehow, financial freedom still feels incredibly far away. You work harder. You save more. But the gap between where you are and where you want to be doesn't seem to shrink. And that's exactly when most people start asking the wrong questions. They ask, which stock should I buy? Or, should I invest in real estate? Or even, should I pay off debt before investing? Those questions matter, but they're not the most important question. Because the worst thing you can do with your money isn't choosing the wrong investment. It isn't taking on debt. And it isn't even losing money in the market. The worst thing you can do with your money is something millions of people are doing right now without realizing it. They're letting their money sit still. And while their money sits still, inflation keeps moving. Interest keeps growing. Opportunity keeps disappearing. And over time, that silent mistake becomes one of the most expensive financial decisions a person can make. My name is Demas, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. If you're someone who feels stuck financially, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Now let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt like you're doing everything you're supposed to do financially, but you're still not getting ahead? You budget your spending. You try to save money every month. You avoid making reckless purchases. You might even be investing a little. Yet somehow it still feels like financial freedom is always just out of reach. If that sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. In fact, millions of people find themselves in exactly the same position. They're working harder than ever, earning more than ever, and yet they still feel financially trapped. And the reason often has nothing to do with intelligence. It has nothing to do with education. And it certainly has nothing to do with how hard they work. The real issue is that most people never learn how money actually behaves over time. They focus on earning money, but they never learn how to direct money. And that distinction changes everything. Because the biggest financial mistakes aren't usually dramatic. They're not the mistakes that make headlines. They're small decisions that seem harmless in the moment, but become incredibly expensive years later. Today, we're going to uncover one of those mistakes. And once you see it, you'll start looking at every dollar you earn in a completely different way. Growing up, most of us hear the exact same financial advice. Save your money, stay out of debt, invest for retirement. And on the surface, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that advice. In fact, it's helped millions of people avoid serious financial problems. But here's the thing. Good advice isn't always complete advice, because real life is rarely that simple. Nobody tells you what to do when you have savings and debt at the same time. Nobody tells you how much cash is too much cash. Nobody tells you when holding money becomes more dangerous than investing it. And that's where confusion starts. Imagine someone who has $20,000 sitting in a savings account. They feel responsible. They feel prepared. They feel financially secure. But at the same time, they're delaying important financial decisions because they don't want to make a mistake. They're waiting for the perfect investment. Waiting for the perfect market condition, waiting until they feel more confident, waiting until they know more. And while they're waiting, months turn into years. Look, most financial mistakes don't happen because people are reckless. They happen because people become paralyzed by uncertainty. They become so focused on avoiding the wrong decision that they never make a decision at all. Now, you might be thinking that's harmless. After all, what's wrong with waiting? This is where it gets really interesting, because money never truly stands still. Even when it's sitting quietly in your bank account, other forces are moving around it. Inflation is moving. Interest rates are moving. Opportunities are moving. And every day you delay making intentional decisions with your money, those forces continue working in the background, whether you notice them or not. Let's put emotions aside for a moment and look at the numbers. Because money doesn't care about opinions. It doesn't care about intentions. Money follows math. Imagine you have $10,000 sitting in a checking account earning almost nothing. At the same time, you're carrying $10,000 in credit card debt with a 20% interest rate. Now, most people look at these as two separate situations. They think, at least I have savings, while also thinking, I'll deal with the debt later. But mathematically, those two things are connected. Every year, that credit card debt is costing you roughly $2,000 in interest. That's money leaving your pocket whether you notice it or not. Here's what most people don't realize. Keeping cash while paying high-interest debt is often like trying to fill a bucket that has a giant hole in the bottom. You keep pouring water in, but the water keeps leaking out. Now let's look at another example. Imagine two people each have $20,000. Person A leaves it sitting in cash for 10 years. Person B invests it into a diversified index fund, earning an average annual return of around 8%. After 10 years, Person A still has about $20,000. Person B has roughly $43,000. Same starting point. Same amount of money. Completely different outcome. And the difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck. It was simply that one person's money stayed idle while the other person's money had a job. Because at the end of the day, wealth isn't created by storing money. It's created by putting money to work. Now let's talk about something that quietly affects every dollar you own, whether you pay attention to it or not. Inflation. Most people understand inflation in theory. Prices go up over time, but very few people truly understand what that means for their money. Look, if you put $50,000 in a safe and come back 20 years later, you'll still have $50,000. At first glance, that sounds like a good thing. You didn't lose any money. Nothing bad happened. Your balance stayed exactly the same. But here's the problem. The world around that money didn't stay the same. The cost of housing increased. The cost of food increased. The cost of healthcare increased. The cost of transportation increased. Everything became more expensive. So while your account balance remained unchanged, your purchasing power slowly declined year after year. This is where it gets really interesting. Inflation doesn't feel dangerous because it happens gradually. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly notice a huge loss. Instead, it works quietly in the background. A little today, a little tomorrow, a little next year, until one day you realize the same amount of money buys significantly less than it used to. Imagine inflation as a tiny leak in a tire. You may not notice it during the first few miles, but if you ignore it long enough, eventually the tire becomes flat. That's exactly how inflation works. And that's why wealthy people don't focus on simply preserving money. They focus on growing money faster than inflation can erode it. Because the goal isn't just to keep your dollars. The goal is to protect what those dollars can actually do for you in the future. At this point, the math seems obvious. If inflation reduces purchasing power and idle money misses opportunities, then why do so many people continue doing nothing? The answer has very little to do with money, and almost everything to do with human psychology. You see, our brains were never designed to build wealth. They were designed to keep us safe. Thousands of years ago, avoiding danger increased our chances of survival. Today, that same instinct often works against us financially. One of the most powerful psychological biases is called loss aversion. Simply put, people hate losing money. In fact, the pain of losing $1,000 usually feels much stronger than the excitement of gaining $1,000. Because of that, many people become obsessed with avoiding mistakes. They avoid investing because they're afraid the market might fall. They avoid paying off large amounts of debt because they fear having less cash available. They avoid making financial decisions because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. And here's the trap. Doing nothing doesn't feel like a decision. It feels safe. It feels responsible. It feels like you're protecting yourself. But look, while you're sitting on the sidelines waiting for certainty, the financial world keeps moving. Inflation keeps eating away at purchasing power. Debt keeps accumulating interest. Opportunities come and go. Time keeps passing. This is where it gets really interesting. The greatest financial risk is often not making the wrong decision. It's waiting so long to make a decision that time quietly becomes your biggest enemy. Because unlike money, time is the one resource you can never earn back. And every year spent waiting is a year compounding can never recover. So if doing nothing is the mistake, what do financially successful people do differently? The answer might surprise you, because wealthy people don't necessarily see money the same way most people do. Most people think of money as something to earn, spend, and hopefully save. Wealthy people see money as a tool for acquiring assets. And that small shift in perspective changes everything. Look, imagine you and your neighbor both earn the exact same income. You both make $100,000 a year. At first, your financial lives look identical. But over time, one major difference appears. One person spends most of their income maintaining their lifestyle. The other consistently uses part of their income to buy productive assets, stocks, businesses, Real estate. Anything capable of generating future cash flow. Now, you might be thinking, that doesn't sound revolutionary. And you're right. The concept is simple, but the long-term effect is enormous. Here's what most people don't realize. Every dollar invested into a productive asset becomes a tiny financial worker. One worker may not accomplish much, but over time, those workers start producing more workers. Then those workers produce even more workers. That's the power of compounding. This is where it gets really interesting. Eventually, wealthy people stop relying entirely on their labor. Their assets begin contributing to their income. Their money starts earning money. And that's why the truly wealthy focus less on how much they make and more on where every dollar goes. Because they understand a simple truth. Income can build wealth, but allocation is what accelerates it. So after everything we've talked about, the obvious question becomes, what should you actually do? Because understanding the problem is important, but taking action is what changes your financial future. Let's keep this simple. Step 1, build an emergency fund. Life is unpredictable. Cars break down, medical bills appear, jobs can change unexpectedly. Having 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside gives you breathing room when life doesn't go according to plan. Step 2, eliminate high-interest debt. If you're paying 20% interest on a credit card, that's not just debt. That's a financial emergency. Every month that balance remains unpaid, it's actively working against you. Step 3, automate your investing. Here's what most people don't realize. Successful investing isn't usually about making brilliant decisions. It's about being consistent. Set up automatic contributions and remove emotions from the process. Step 4, invest in yourself. Improve your skills, increase your value, learn things that can increase your income over time. A higher income creates more opportunities to save, invest, and build wealth. And finally, give every dollar a job. Before spending or saving money, ask yourself one simple question. What is this dollar supposed to accomplish for my future? Because when every dollar has a purpose, your financial life becomes intentional instead of reactive. And that's when real progress begins. So let's bring everything together. We've talked about saving money. We've talked about debt. We've talked about inflation, investing, and the psychology that keeps people stuck. And if there's one lesson I hope you take away from this video, it's this. The worst thing you can do with your money is leave it without a purpose. Because money is a tool, and tools are designed to be used. A hammer that never leaves the toolbox never builds a house. A car that never leaves the garage never takes you anywhere. And money that never gets deployed never creates wealth. Here's the thing. Financial success is rarely about making one perfect decision. It's usually the result of making many small, intentional decisions over a long period of time. You don't need to predict the next stock market winner. You don't need to become a financial expert overnight. And you don't need a massive income to get started. What you need is action, consistent action. Because every year you delay, you're not just losing money, you're losing time. And time is the one asset that compounds everything else. Look, the people who eventually build wealth aren't necessarily smarter than everyone else. They're simply willing to stop waiting. They stop waiting for perfect conditions. They stop waiting for certainty. And they start putting their money to work. So the next time money enters your life, ask yourself one simple question. Is this dollar helping me build the future I want? Because once your money starts working harder than you do, everything changes. And that is when real financial freedom finally begins.